I never thought owning a snow plow would turn me into the most hated man in Bergen County, New Jersey. But here we are. My name is Zachary Morrison, and I bought my house in the Willow Creek Estates subdivision 3 years ago when I was 32. It was a decent place back then, quiet neighborhood, reasonable HOA fees, nothing too crazy. I run a landscaping business, Morrison's Outdoor Services, which does pretty well for itself. During the winter months, I pivot to snow removal, and that's where this whole mess started. Last November, I invested in a serious piece of equipment. A brand new pickup truck with a commercial-grade plow attachment, the kind that can move massive amounts of snow in a single pass. Cost me $45,000, but it was worth every penny for the contracts I had lined up. I had residential clients, business parking lots, even a few municipal contracts in neighboring towns. My schedule during snowstorms was packed, sometimes working 18-hour days, but the money was excellent. The trouble began on a Tuesday morning in early December when I got a knock on my door. I had just finished my coffee and was reviewing the weather forecast, which called for 6 to 8 inches that evening. Standing on my porch was Patricia Winters, the president of our HOA, a woman in her late 40s with that specific haircut that screams, "I need to speak to your manager." She wore a puffy North Face jacket and held a clipboard like it was a royal scepter. "Zachary, good morning," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." "Just getting ready for work, Patricia. What can I do for you?" She glanced at my truck in the driveway, the massive plow blade catching the morning light. "I see you have quite the setup there. Very impressive." "Thanks. It is for my business." "Yes, about that." She clicked her pen and consulted her clipboard. "The HOA board had a meeting last night, and we have a proposal for you. With the winter season upon us, we thought it would be wonderful if you could help out the community by plowing the common areas and perhaps some of the driveways for our elderly residents." I felt my stomach tighten. "Patricia, I appreciate the thought, but I run a business. I have contracts and clients who pay for my services." Her smile never wavered. "Oh, of course. But you live here too, Zachary. We all contribute to making Willow Creek Estates a better place. Think of it as your way of giving back to the community. Plus, it would look so good, having our own resident with professional equipment taking care of things." "How many driveways are we talking about?" "Well, we have 4 elderly residents, and then there are the common areas, the clubhouse parking lot, and the walking paths. Nothing too demanding for someone with your equipment." I did some quick math in my head. That would be at least 3 hours of work every time it snowed, and I would lose valuable time I could spend on paying clients. I would need to charge the HOA my standard rate. For that amount of work, probably $400 per storm. Patricia's expression shifted, the fake warmth draining away. "Charge? Zachary, this is a community service. We all do our part without expecting payment. I organize the summer social. Margaret volunteers at the clubhouse. This is what neighbors do." With respect, Patricia, organizing a social does not cost you thousands of dollars in equipment, fuel, insurance, and labor. This is how I make my living. She straightened her posture, and I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. "I see. Well, I will take your response back to the board." "I must say I am disappointed. I thought you were more of a team player." "It is not about being a team player. It is about running a legitimate business." "We will be in touch," she said curtly, then turned and walked back down my driveway. That evening, the snow started falling right on schedule. I spent the entire night plowing my contracted properties, making good money and keeping my clients happy. By the time I got home at 6 in the morning, I was exhausted but satisfied. The subdivision roads were plowed by the county, but individual driveways were the homeowner's responsibility. I cleared mine quickly and went inside to crash. I woke up at noon to 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. Most were from Patricia, but there were also messages from other HOA board members. The texts escalated from polite requests to barely concealed threats about community obligations and neighborly duties. The final message from Patricia, sent at 10 in the morning, read, "Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7 p.m. Your attendance is mandatory per Section 4.7 of the bylaws. This concerns your violation of community standards." Violation. I had not violated anything. I grabbed my copy of the HOA bylaws, a document I had skimmed when buying the house but never studied in detail. Section 4.7 stated that homeowners operating businesses from their property must ensure those businesses do not negatively impact the community. It was vague enough to be meaningless. I showed up to the meeting that evening at the clubhouse, a small building near the subdivision entrance that hosted community events. About 30 residents were there, which was unusual. Normally, these meetings attracted maybe 8 people. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members. Douglas Chen, the vice president, Margaret Fletcher, the treasurer, Karen Hendricks, the secretary, and Tom Bartlett, a general board member. Karen Hendricks was Patricia's right-hand woman, a 50-year-old with highlighted blonde hair and a perpetual expression of disapproval. She had moved into the subdivision 6 months ago and immediately attached herself to Patricia's inner circle. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Patricia began, standing at a podium like she was addressing the United Nations. "We have an urgent matter to discuss regarding one of our residents and his refusal to contribute to community welfare." All eyes turned to me. Zachary Morrison operates a snow removal business and owns professional-grade equipment. Last night, while our elderly residents struggled to shovel their driveways, while our walking paths remained buried, Zachary was out making money from people outside our community. When we asked him, very politely, to help his neighbors, he demanded payment. A murmur ran through the crowd. Patricia was spinning this beautifully, making me sound like a greedy monster. I stood up. "That is not exactly accurate, Patricia. You asked me to provide free commercial services, which would cost me time and money that I need to run my business. I offered to do the work at my standard rate, which is completely reasonable." $400 per snowfall, Karen interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. "That is price gouging, plain and simple, taking advantage of your own neighbors. That is my business rate, which is competitive with every other snow removal service in Bergen County. I have overhead costs, equipment maintenance, insurance, and fuel. This is not a hobby." Douglas Chen, who usually stayed quiet during these meetings, spoke up. "Zachary, nobody is questioning your business, but you have to admit optics matter. You driving past your neighbors' homes with that huge plow while they are out shoveling, it does not look good. So I should work for free because of optics." "You should work for free because that is what good neighbors do," Patricia said firmly. "We have a motion on the floor to require any resident operating a snow removal business to provide services to the HOA common areas and designated resident properties during snow events. All in favor?" "Wait, you cannot just make up rules on the spot," I protested. "Actually, we can," Karen said smugly. Section 3.2 allows the board to create new policies with a simple majority vote when necessary to maintain community standards. The 4 board members raised their hands. Tom Bartlett hesitated but ultimately joined them. "Motion passes," Patricia announced. "Zachary, You are now required to plow the designated areas, or you will face fines of $250 per day of non-compliance. This is insane. You cannot force me to provide free labor. You are not being forced, Patricia said sweetly. You are welcome to not use your plow at all, but if you do use it to conduct business, you must also serve your community. It is only fair. I looked around the room, hoping someone would speak up on my behalf, but most residents avoided eye contact. A few looked sympathetic but said nothing. The elderly residents Patricia mentioned were not even present at the meeting. I will be consulting with a lawyer about this, I said. That is your right, Patricia replied. But until you get a court order saying otherwise, the policy stands. The next snowfall is expected this Friday. We will be watching. I walked out of that meeting furious. Back home, I immediately started researching HOA law in New Jersey. Turns out, HOAs have broad authority, but they cannot force unpaid labor, and they cannot create selective rules that target specific individuals. This policy was clearly aimed at me since I was the only person in the subdivision with a commercial plow. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer named Stephen Ramirez, who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in Hackensack, about 20 minutes from my house. I explained the situation over the phone, and he agreed to take the case. They are definitely overstepping, Stephen said during our meeting that afternoon. Compelled labor without compensation violates several principles of contract law and could even touch on constitutional issues. But here is the problem. Fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. They have legal funds from everyone's dues, so they can drag this out. You will be paying out of pocket. So what do I do? Short term, you have a few options. You can comply under protest while we build a case. You can refuse and pay the fines while we fight them. Or you can get creative within the bounds of the law. Creative how? Stephen leaned back in his chair. Technically, if they are requiring you to plow, they are not specifying how you plow. You would be meeting the letter of their requirement while making it clear this arrangement does not work. But you have to be careful not to do anything that constitutes property damage or harassment. An idea was forming in my mind. What if the snow I plow from the common areas has to go somewhere? That is a normal part of snow removal. You push it to the edges, create piles in designated areas. As long as you are not intentionally damaging property or creating hazards, you are just doing the job they demanded you do. Even if those piles are inconvenient, Stephen smiled slightly. Inconvenient is not illegal. Just make sure you are not blocking fire hydrants, creating traffic hazards, or doing anything that could be construed as deliberate vandalism. I left that meeting with a plan forming. The forecast showed a major storm system moving in Friday night, expected to dump 12 to 15 inches of heavy, wet snow. Perfect. Friday afternoon, I prepared my equipment meticulously. I checked the plow blade, made sure the hydraulics were functioning perfectly, filled the gas tank, and reviewed the locations Patricia had designated. The common areas included the clubhouse parking lot, 3 cul-de-sac islands with decorative landscaping, and about a quarter-mile of walking paths. The 4 driveways belonged to residents on Oak Street and Maple Drive. The snow started at 8 in the evening. I spent the first part of the night handling my paying clients as their contracts took priority. By 2 in the morning, I had finished those jobs and returned to Willow Creek Estates. The snow was still falling heavily, already past the 10-inch mark. I started with the elderly residents' driveways. I did a professional job, clearing them completely and making sure the snow was pushed to the sides neatly. These people had not asked for any of this, and I was not about to punish them for Patricia's power trip. Mrs. Chen, An 82-year-old widow actually came out to thank me, standing in her doorway in a bathrobe. "You are a good boy, Zachary," she called out. "Thank you so much." "No problem, Mrs. Chen. Stay warm." Then I moved to the common areas. The clubhouse parking lot was first. Now, normally, when you plow a parking lot, you push the snow to the perimeter in neat piles that do not obstruct anything important. You avoid creating hazards, and you make sure entrances and exits remain clear. But Patricia had not specified how I should pile the snow. She just said I had to plow. The clubhouse had a row of mailboxes along the front sidewalk, the kind where each unit has a separate locked box in a larger structure. There were about 40 boxes total, serving the entire subdivision. The mailboxes sat on a small concrete pad about 3 feet wide. I angled my plow and started pushing snow from the parking lot. Instead of creating neat piles along the back fence, I pushed every single ounce of snow toward the front of the building. The plow blade was incredibly efficient, moving massive amounts of snow with each pass. I made multiple trips across the parking lot, gathering snow and depositing it all in the same location, right in front of the mailboxes. With each pass, the pile grew 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. The wet, heavy snow packed together perfectly, creating a solid wall. I kept going, adding more and more, using the plow to shape it and compress it. By the time I finished the parking lot, the mailbox structure was completely buried under at least 6 feet of snow. You could not even tell there were mailboxes there anymore. It just looked like a massive snow pile against the building. The parking lot itself was immaculate, completely clear and safe. I had done exactly what Patricia asked. Next were the cul-de-sac islands. These were decorative circles in the middle of 3 different cul-de-sacs, featuring mailbox clusters for those particular streets. I repeated my technique at each location. I cleared the streets beautifully, making sure every driveway entrance was accessible. But the snow had to go somewhere, right? So I piled it on top of each mailbox cluster, creating monuments of snow that completely obscured the mailboxes beneath. 6 feet at Oak Street, 6.5 feet at Maple Drive, nearly 7 feet at Birch Court, because that cul-de-sac was larger and produced more snow. The walking paths were last. These were decorative trails that wound through common areas, used by residents for exercise and dog walking. I cleared them perfectly, making sure they were safe and accessible. The snow from the paths went into the surrounding woods and landscape beds, which was completely standard practice. By 6 in the morning, I had finished. Every area Patricia designated was plowed. Every single one. I had photographic evidence on my phone showing the clear parking lots, the accessible driveways, the safe walking paths. I had done professional quality work. The mailboxes being buried was simply an unfortunate consequence of having to put the snow somewhere. I went home, took a shower, and slept like a baby. My phone woke me at 9:30. Patricia was calling. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. By the 10th call, I answered. "Good morning, Patricia. What did you do?" She was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I plowed the areas you designated, just like the HOA required. The mailboxes, you buried all the mailboxes." "Oh, I had to put the snow somewhere. That is how plowing works. You move snow from one place to another." "You did this on purpose." "I did my job on purpose, yes. I take pride in my work." "Get over here right now and fix this." "Patricia, I fulfilled my obligation. I plowed the designated areas. They are all clear and safe." If you want additional services like snow relocation, that would be a separate job. I can do it for $300. You will do IT for free or I will fine you for property damage. I did not damage any property. The mailboxes are fine under the snow. They are federal property anyway, very sturdy, and the snow will melt eventually. Eventually. The forecast shows temperatures staying below freezing for the next week. Nobody can get their mail. That does sound inconvenient. My offer stands. $300, and I will relocate the snow this afternoon. She hung up on me. 20 minutes later, I got a formal email from the HOA with Karen Hendricks' name on it, informing me I was being fined $500 for willful property obstruction and failure to perform services in good faith. I forwarded it to Stephen, my lawyer, with a note. It begins. Stephen called me an hour later, laughing. "This is beautiful. They are making this so easy. You did not violate any laws or bylaws. Snow placement is at the operator's discretion as long as it does not create hazards. Mailboxes being temporarily inaccessible due to snow is a common occurrence every winter. They cannot fine you for this. So what happens now? I will send them a cease and desist letter, but honestly, let them keep digging. Every illegal fine, every overreach, it builds our case. Just document everything." Over the next few days, the subdivision descended into chaos. Without access to the mailboxes, residents had to go to the post office in Ridgewood to collect their mail. The line stretched out the door, and the staff was overwhelmed. People were missing important deliveries, bills, and holiday cards. Patricia tried to organize a snow removal party, asking for volunteers to dig out the mailboxes. About 15 people showed up with shovels, but 6 feet of packed snow is not easy to move. After 3 hours, they had barely made a dent in one pile. Someone suggested bringing in a professional service, but when they got quotes ranging from $400 to $600 per location, Patricia refused. "We are not paying for something that should have been done correctly in the first place," she declared at an impromptu meeting in someone's garage. Karen Hendricks suggested they find me more money to pay for professional snow removal. The board voted to increase my fines to $1,000. Stephen sent them a strongly worded letter explaining that their fines were without legal basis and that continued harassment would result in a lawsuit. They ignored it. Meanwhile, I was getting mixed reactions from neighbors. Some people clearly blamed me and gave me dirty looks when I drove by. Others, though, were starting to see the situation differently. A guy named Marcus Thompson, who lived 2 streets over, stopped me at the grocery store. "Hey, Zachary, I just want you to know, not everyone thinks you are the bad guy here," he said quietly. "What Patricia is doing, forcing you to work for free, it is not right. My wife and I talked about it. If they can do this to you, they can do it to anyone." "I appreciate that, Marcus. Patricia is telling everyone you sabotaged the mailboxes on purpose, but I watched you work that night." "I have insomnia, so I was up. You were just plowing. The snow had to go somewhere." "Exactly. Anyway, just wanted you to know you have some support, even if people are not saying it publicly. Patricia has made a lot of enemies over the years." That conversation was encouraging, but the pressure kept mounting. The HOA placed a lien on my property for the unpaid fines, which now totaled $2,500. Stephen assured me it would not stand up in court, but it was still stressful seeing that legal notice. The next snowfall came the following Wednesday, another 8 inches. I repeated my routine, paying clients first, then the designated areas in the subdivision. And once again, the snow ended up burying the mailboxes. By this point, the original piles had compacted into solid ice, and now there was a fresh layer on top. Some of the piles were approaching 8 feet. The post office situation was getting desperate. The postmaster, a tired-looking man named Gerald, actually came to one of the HOA meetings to complain. "This is a federal matter now," Gerald explained. Mailbox access must be maintained. If this continues, we may have to suspend delivery to the entire subdivision and require everyone to use P.O. boxes at the post office. Patricia tried to blame me. Zachary Morrison is deliberately burying the mailboxes. He is the one creating this problem. Gerald shook his head. Madam, I have reviewed the situation. Snow piles blocking mailboxes happen every winter. It is the property owner's responsibility to keep them clear. Since these are common area mailboxes, that responsibility falls to the HOA. But we hired him to plow. Did you provide specifications for snow placement in your contract? There is no contract. We required him to do it as part of his community obligations. Gerald frowned. You required him to provide unpaid labor. Madam, that is between you and him, but the federal government's concern is mailbox access. The HOA needs to clear those mailboxes within 48 hours, or we will suspend delivery. After Gerald left, Patricia was practically vibrating with rage. This is your fault, Zachary. You are destroying this community. I am plowing the areas you demanded I plow, nothing more, nothing less. You know exactly what you are doing. I know I am running a business and being forced to provide free labor under threat of fines. Yes, I know exactly what I am doing. Karen stood up, her face red. You are a spiteful, petty little man. You are punishing everyone because you did not get your way. I am following the HOA's rules. You wanted me to plow. I am plowing. The meeting dissolved into shouting. Several residents who had been quietly sympathetic to me started speaking up, questioning why the HOA had created this mandatory service policy in the first place. Patricia tried to maintain order, but the room was divided. Finally, Douglas Chen, the vice president, said something that shifted the dynamic. Patricia, maybe we should just pay him. This is getting out of hand. The legal fees we are spending fighting with Steven Ramirez probably exceed what Zachary was asking for in the first place. Absolutely not. That would be letting him win. This is not about winning, Douglas said, sounding tired. This is about mail delivery and community harmony. We made a mistake with this policy. Let's admit it and move forward. I will not reward extortion. It is not extortion to charge for professional services. The meeting ended without resolution, but I could tell the board was fracturing. Douglas and Tom Bartlett were clearly having doubts. Margaret, the treasurer, looked stressed, probably aware of how much money they were wasting on legal fees. The HOA hired their own snow removal company to clear the mailboxes, paying $800. The company showed up with a small backhoe and spent 4 hours moving the compressed snow. I watched from my window, sipping coffee. 2 days later, another storm hit. 11 inches this time. I plowed everything perfectly. And once again, the mailboxes disappeared under 6 to 7 feet of snow. Patricia filed a police report, claiming I was vandalizing federal property. Officer Raymond Davies came to my house to take a statement. He was a calm, professional guy in his early 40s who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Mr. Morrison, I have to ask you about the mailbox situation at your HOA. Sure, officer. What would you like to know, Mrs. Winters claims you are deliberately burying the mailboxes under excessive amounts of snow. I am plowing the areas the HOA board required me to plow. The snow has to be placed somewhere. I am not blocking traffic, not creating hazards, and not damaging any property. The mailboxes are federal property. They are also buried naturally by snow every winter, sir. I am not harming them. They are designed to withstand weather conditions. Officer Davies nodded slowly. Look, I have to write up a report, but between you and me, this sounds like a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. Unless there is evidence of intentional property damage, which there does not appear to be, the police cannot really do anything. I appreciate your honesty, officer. For what it is worth, my brother-in-law runs a landscaping business. I know how hard it is to make a living. The idea that someone would demand free services just because you live in the same neighborhood, it does not sit right with me. Thank you. After Officer Davies left, I felt a small sense of vindication, but the stress was building. My business was doing fine, but the constant fighting was exhausting. I was sleeping poorly, always anticipating the next confrontation. The HOA escalated again, filing a lawsuit against me for breach of community bylaws and seeking $10,000 in damages. Stephen had predicted this and was ready. He countersued for harassment, abuse of authority, and violation of labor laws. Now it gets interesting, Stephen said during a meeting at his office. Discovery will force them to produce all their internal communications, board meeting minutes, and financial records. If there is anything shady, we will find it. How long will this take? Months, maybe a year. But you are in a strong position, Zachary. Just stay calm and do not give them any ammunition. The legal process moved slowly, but the court of public opinion was shifting. A resident named Beth Simmons started a private Facebook group called Willow Creek Truth, where people discussed HOA overreach. The group grew to over 60 members out of roughly 150 households in the subdivision. People shared their own stories of Patricia's petty enforcement actions. Fines for the wrong shade of mailbox, complaints about garden decorations, threats over lawn maintenance. A pattern emerged. Patricia and Karen used the HOA as a personal fiefdom, targeting anyone they disliked or anyone who questioned their authority. My situation was just the most visible example. In February, another major storm dumped 14 inches. By this point, I had established such a clear pattern that there was no ambiguity. I plowed beautifully, documented everything with photos and videos, and the mailboxes ended up buried again. The snow piles were now approaching 10 feet in some locations, massive frozen monuments to bureaucratic stupidity. The post office suspended delivery to the entire subdivision, forcing everyone to collect mail from the Ridgewood location. This affected Patricia too, and I took a petty satisfaction in seeing her wait in the same long lines as everyone else. The HOA hired the snow removal company again, this time paying $950 because the piles were so large. Margaret, the treasurer, apparently had a breakdown at the next board meeting, crying about how the legal fees and snow removal costs were depleting the reserve fund. The HOA might need to levy a special assessment, charging every homeowner extra money to cover the costs. That threat finally broke the logjam. Homeowners who had been neutral or passive were suddenly very interested in the situation. Nobody wanted to pay extra money because Patricia refused to compromise. A petition started circulating demanding an emergency election to recall the board. Patricia tried to fight it, but the bylaws were clear. If 30% of homeowners signed, an election was mandatory. The petition reached 40%. The recall election was scheduled for mid-March. In the meantime, the lawsuit moved forward. Discovery was brutal for the HOA. Stephen obtained their internal emails, and they were damning. Patricia and Karen had discussed me extensively, calling me names, strategizing about how to force that arrogant jerk to fall in line, and even joking about making my life so miserable I would sell my house and leave. Even worse, they had discussed the mandatory service policy in emails before I bought my plow, meaning they had been planning this kind of move but found a convenient target when I invested in commercial equipment. There were also irregularities in how the HOA funds were being spent, questionable expenses that looked suspiciously like personal charges. Stephen filed a motion to have the case dismissed in my favor and to impose sanctions on the HOA for frivolous litigation. The judge scheduled a hearing for late March. The recall election happened on March 18th at the clubhouse, which was packed with residents. I had never seen so many people engaged with HOA business. The vote was not even close. Patricia, Karen, and the other board members who had supported the mandatory service policy were removed by a margin of 73 to 22. New board members were elected, including Douglas Chen as president and Beth Simmons as secretary. One of their first actions was to repeal the mandatory service policy. Another was to authorize payment of my legal fees as part of a settlement. They also launched an audit of the HOA finances, which uncovered that Patricia had been using the HOA credit card for personal purchases, including dinners, shopping trips, and even a weekend getaway to the Poconos. The total amount of misappropriated funds was over $12,000. The new board filed a police report, and in late April, Patricia was arrested for theft and fraud. Karen was charged as an accessory for helping conceal some of the expenses. I watched from my living room window as the police car pulled up to Patricia's house. She came out in handcuffs, her face pale and shocked, like she could not believe this was happening to her. Part of me felt bad, but mostly I felt relieved. The nightmare was finally over. The court hearing for my case was almost anticlimactic. The judge reviewed the evidence, including the emails, the timeline of events, and the HOA's own admission that they had required unpaid labor. He dismissed the case against me with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled, and ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees, which totaled $18,000. This is one of the clearest cases of organizational overreach I have seen, the judge said from the bench. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining property values and community standards, but they are not feudal lords. Mr. Morrison operates a legitimate business and cannot be compelled to provide unpaid labor simply because he resides in the subdivision. The board's actions were punitive, targeted, and ultimately illegal. Case dismissed. Stephen and I celebrated with lunch at a steakhouse in Hackensack. "You handled this perfectly," he said, raising his glass. "You never lost your cool, you documented everything, and you let them hang themselves with their own rope. I could not have done it without you. True, but you had good instincts. Most people would have either rolled over or lost their temper and done something stupid. You played it smart." Spring came to Bergen County, and the massive snow piles finally melted, revealing the mailboxes intact beneath. Life in Willow Creek Estates slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was reasonable and professional, focusing on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. Several neighbors apologized to me for not speaking up sooner. Mrs. Chen baked me cookies. Marcus Thompson invited me to a barbecue. Even some of the people who had initially blamed me admitted they had been caught up in Patricia's narrative and had not seen the full picture. Patricia eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to repay the stolen funds. Karen took a plea deal and paid a fine. They both moved out of the subdivision within 6 months, unable to face the judgment of their former neighbors. My business thrived. Word got around about what happened, and I actually gained clients who respected the fact that I stood up for myself. The story made local news, with headlines like "HOA tyranny ends in arrest" and "Snow Plow operator defeats mandatory service policy." I got interview requests, which I mostly declined, preferring to let the matter fade into the past. But I did agree to one interview with a local newspaper, the Bergen Record. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, asked me what I learned from the experience. I learned that standing up for yourself is exhausting and expensive, but sometimes necessary, I said. I also learned that communities work best when people treat each other with respect and fairness. You cannot force someone to serve you for free and expect them to do it with a smile. That is not how any of this works. Do you regret how you handled the snow removal? I thought about that for a moment. No, I fulfilled my obligation exactly as they demanded. They wanted me to plow those areas, and I did. The fact that it created consequences they did not anticipate is not my problem. If they had approached me reasonably from the beginning, offered fair compensation, we could have worked something out. But they chose coercion over cooperation. They made their bed. Or their snow pile, Jessica said with a grin. Exactly. The article ran with a photo of me standing next to my plow truck, arms crossed, looking confident. Some people said I looked smug. Maybe I did. I had earned it. By the time summer arrived, the whole incident felt like a distant memory. The new HOA board hired me at my regular rate to maintain the common area landscaping. We had a professional contract, clear terms, and mutual respect. It was how business should be done. One evening in July, I was mowing the grass at the clubhouse when Douglas Chen came over to chat. "Zachary, I wanted to thank you again for how you handled everything," he said. "I know I did not speak up strongly enough during those board meetings. I should have opposed Patricia more directly. You were in a tough spot, Douglas. I do not blame you. Still, I learned something from watching you. Sometimes you have to be willing to fight, even when it is uncomfortable. You forced us all to confront what the HOA had become. I was just trying to protect my business. It was more than that. You stood on principle. That matters." We talked for a while longer, and I realized that despite all the stress and conflict, something positive had come from the experience. The community was healthier now. The HOA functioned properly. People were more engaged and willing to question authority. And I had established something important. My work had value, and I would not be bullied into giving it away. As I finished mowing that evening, the sun setting over the subdivision in brilliant orange and gold, I felt genuinely content. My business was strong. My reputation was solid. My community had learned an important lesson about fairness and respect, and if it ever snowed again, I knew exactly where I would put it. The legal aftermath continued through the summer, though in a much quieter way. Stephen helped me file a formal complaint with the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs, which oversees HOA regulations. The investigation into Willow Creek Estates revealed numerous violations of state law, including improper meeting procedures, inadequate financial disclosures, and failure to maintain proper records. The department issued a detailed report that became part of the public record, essentially creating a roadmap for other homeowners dealing with similar issues. Several residents from other subdivisions in Bergen County reached out to me, asking for advice about their own HOA problems. I referred them to Stephen and shared my experience, careful not to present myself as any kind of expert. But I could offer perspective, and sometimes that was enough. One guy, a mechanical engineer named Phil who lived in Paramus, was dealing with an HOA that wanted him to remove his boat from his driveway, even though the bylaws did not prohibit it. "They are just making up rules as they go," he complained during a phone conversation. "Document everything," I told him. "Every communication, every meeting, every decision. When they overreach, they will create evidence against themselves. Just be patient and stay professional." That is harder than it sounds. Trust me, I know, but losing your cool only gives them ammunition. Phil successfully fought his HOA and thanked me profusely, saying my example had given him the courage to push back. In August, the Willow Creek HOA held its annual meeting, the first under the new board. The attendance was remarkable, probably 60 or 70 people, 3 times the normal turnout. Douglas presented a transparent financial report, showing exactly where every dollar went. He also introduced new policies to prevent future abuses. Term limits for board members, mandatory annual audits, and a requirement that any new policy affecting specific individuals or businesses needed a full homeowner vote, not just a board decision. "We learned some hard lessons this year," Douglas said to the assembled crowd. "This organization exists to serve the community, not to control it. Our job is to maintain property values and common areas, not to micromanage people's lives. Moving forward, we will operate with transparency, fairness, and respect for everyone's rights." The room erupted in applause. It felt like a new beginning. My role in the drama gradually faded from daily conversation, though I remained a minor legend in the subdivision. Kids would sometimes point at my truck and say, "That is the guy who buried the mailboxes." Parents would shush them, but they were not wrong. I had become part of the local folklore, the man who fought the HOA and won. Business continued to boom. In September, I landed a major contract with a shopping center in Hackensack, managing all their landscaping and winter snow removal. The property manager specifically mentioned that he had read about the HOA situation and respected how I handled it. "You stood up for your business principles," he said. "That tells me you are someone I can trust to do the job right." It was validation I had not expected but deeply appreciated. In October, I attended a town hall meeting in Ridgewood where local officials discussed new legislation to reform HOA governance across New Jersey. My case was specifically mentioned as an example of why reform was needed. A state senator named Michelle Roberts cited the mandatory service policy as exactly the kind of overreach that gives homeowner associations a bad reputation. "Property owners have rights," Senator Roberts declared. "No private organization should be able to compel unpaid labor or target individuals with punitive policies. We need clear guardrails to prevent abuses while still allowing HOAs to serve their legitimate functions." The proposed legislation would require HOAs to follow stricter procedural rules, maintain better financial transparency, and provide homeowners with clearer appeal processes. It would also explicitly prohibit mandatory service policies like the one Patricia tried to enforce. I testified briefly, describing my experience and supporting the reforms. It felt good to turn a negative situation into something constructive that could help others. The first snow of the season came in late November, just a few inches. I had contracts lined up, including a new agreement with the Willow Creek HOA to plow the common areas for a fair, negotiated rate. This time, I created neat, professional snow piles that did not obstruct anything. The mailboxes remained clear and accessible. It was how the job should have been done from the beginning, and it felt right. Mrs. Chen waved to me from her window as I plowed her driveway, and I waved back. Marcus Thompson gave me a thumbs up as I drove past. These small moments of normal neighborliness were surprisingly meaningful after everything that had happened. A few days before Christmas, I received a letter from the New Jersey State Bar Association. Stephen had nominated me for a Citizen Advocate Award, recognizing individuals who stood up for legal rights in their communities. I did not win, but being nominated was honor enough. The letter specifically praised my principled stand against organizational overreach and commitment to fair business practices. I framed it and hung it in my office, next to my business licenses and certifications. Christmas Eve, I was invited to a neighborhood party at Beth Simmons' house. About 20 people showed up, including several new HOA board members and various neighbors I had gotten to know better over the past year. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, nothing like the tension that had defined the community a year earlier. Douglas approached me by the fireplace, holding a cup of eggnog. "Zachary, I wanted to let you know the board is discussing a formal apology for what happened last winter. It should have come sooner, but we wanted to make sure it was meaningful." "That is not necessary, Douglas. We have moved forward. It is necessary. What was done to you was wrong, and the organization needs to acknowledge it officially, not just for you, but for the principal. So everyone knows that kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Then I accept and I appreciate it." We clinked our cups together, and I felt a sense of closure that had been missing. The fight was truly over. I had won not just legally, but morally. The community had transformed, and I had been a catalyst for that change. As I drove home that night, snow starting to fall gently, I reflected on the entire experience. It had been stressful, expensive, and exhausting. There were moments I questioned whether fighting was worth it, whether I should have just complied and moved on. But in the end, I was glad I stood my ground, because principles matter. Fairness matters. And the idea that people with a little bit of power can force others to serve them without compensation, that needed to be challenged and defeated. The snow continued to fall as I pulled into my driveway. My plow truck sat ready, a tool of my trade and now a symbol of resistance. I smiled, thinking about Patricia and Karen, about their arrogance and their ultimate downfall. I thought about the judge's ruling, about the new HOA board, about the legislative reforms underway. I thought about all the neighbors who had apologized, who had learned to question authority, who had become more engaged citizens of their community. And I thought about those mailboxes, buried under 6 feet of snow, a perfect metaphor for what happens when bureaucracy loses sight of common sense. I never set out to be a crusader or a hero. I just wanted to run my business and live my life. But sometimes circumstances force you to become something more, to stand up not just for yourself, but for principles that matter to everyone. As I sat in my warm house that Christmas Eve, watching snow accumulate outside, I knew I had done the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the convenient thing, but the right thing. And that made all the difference. The new year brought fresh opportunities and a sense of renewal. Zachary Morrison Outdoor Services expanded, hiring 2 employees to help with the growing workload. I trained them carefully, emphasizing professionalism and respect for clients. I wanted to build something lasting, a business with a real reputation. In February, Stephen called with unexpected news. Patricia's attorney had contacted him about settling the remaining civil issues. Apparently, she wanted to avoid any further legal exposure and was willing to pay an additional $10,000 to resolve all claims permanently. "What do you think?" Stephen asked. "Is there any more to gain by pushing? Probably not. You have won on every substantive issue. This would just be final closure and some compensation for your troubles. Then let's settle. I am ready to move on completely." The settlement was finalized in March. Patricia paid the money and I signed a mutual release. It was over, truly and finally over. Spring came again to New Jersey, my second spring since the conflict began. The subdivision looked beautiful, the common areas well maintained, the community functioning smoothly. I had become just another resident again, no longer defined by the fight but by my contributions and character. One Saturday morning in April, I was working in my front yard when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out looking nervous. "Are you Zachary Morrison?" "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Amanda Foster. I live in Montclair. My HOA is trying to force my husband to repaint our house a specific color, even though our current color is within the approved palette. We have been reading about your case, and I was hoping you might offer some advice." I invited her to sit on my porch and we talked for half an hour. I shared what I had learned. Document everything, know your bylaws, get a good lawyer, and never lose your professional demeanor no matter how frustrated you get. The key is to let them overreach, I explained. If you respond emotionally or aggressively, you look like the problem. But if you stay calm and force them to justify their actions, they usually reveal themselves to be unreasonable. "That is what impressed me about your case," Amanda said. "You never seemed angry in any of the articles I read. You just seemed confident. Trust me, I was angry plenty of times, but I did not let them see it." She left with Stephen's contact information and a renewed sense of confidence. Over the following months, several more people reached out with similar stories. I had become an inadvertent consultant for HOA disputes, which was strange but satisfying. If my experience could help others avoid or win similar fights, then something good had come from the struggle. The summer passed peacefully. I worked, I earned, I lived my life. The Willow Creek HOA functioned exactly as it should, handling maintenance and common concerns without drama or overreach. Board meetings were well attended, decisions were transparent, and residents felt heard. In August, the New Jersey legislature passed the HOA Reform Act, incorporating many of the provisions discussed earlier in the year. It included protections against mandatory service policies, requirements for financial transparency, and clearer appeal procedures for homeowners. Governor Phil Murphy signed it in a ceremony where several advocates spoke, including me. This legislation ensures that homeowner associations serve their communities rather than control them, the governor said. "We are protecting property rights while preserving the legitimate functions of these organizations. This is good governance." I shook the governor's hand and posed for a photo that ended up in several newspapers. It was surreal, seeing my face associated with actual legislative change. I was just a guy who bought a snowplow and refused to be pushed around, but somehow that simple act of resistance had sparked something bigger. As autumn arrived again, I reflected on how much my life had changed in 2 years. My business was thriving beyond anything I had imagined. My community was healthier and more engaged. I had made real friends among my neighbors, relationships built on mutual respect rather than passive proximity. And I had learned something fundamental about power and principle. Those who seek to dominate others, who use rules and regulations as weapons, they usually overplay their hand. They cannot help themselves. And when they do, when they push too far, they create the circumstances for their own defeat. Patricia and Karen thought they were entitled to my labor because they held positions of minor authority. They thought they could bully me into compliance because most people would rather avoid conflict than fight. They were wrong. The first serious snow of the season came in December, 9 inches of heavy, wet snow. I plowed my contracted properties with practiced efficiency, including the Willow Creek common areas. The work was satisfying, the results professional. The mailboxes remained clear and accessible, exactly as they should be. As I finished the clubhouse parking lot in the early morning hours, watching the snow fall gently in my headlights, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was my work. This was my business. And nobody would ever take it from me or force me to give it away. The plow blade scraped against pavement, pushing snow into neat piles along the fence line. Every pass was efficient, purposeful, professional. This was how the job should be done, and this was how I would always do it. Because I was Zachary Morrison, and I had learned the most important lesson of all. Stand up for yourself, fight for what is right, and never let anyone make you small. The snow continued to fall, covering Bergen County in white, and I continued to work, doing what I did best. The mailboxes stood clear and accessible, the driveways were clean, the parking lots were safe. Everything was exactly as it should be.